Hey, this is Brett, and you're watching Brett and Some Books. Today we are continuing Boxcar Bertha, an autobiography. Chapter 6. Ina and I were drinking considerably and hanging around Toby's. She had lost her lover because of Toby and had forgotten all about her New York plans, but then suddenly she became nauseated with Toby's filthy talk. "I'm sick of Chicago, Bertha," she complained. "Come on south or any place with me, will you? Let's take our time and travel by freight." Meanwhile, I was getting restless too. I'd stayed too long at a job, so I agreed. The night before we left, I spent in Franklin Jordan's arms. One fleeting happy night. Ina and I took an Illinois Central train in an empty boxcar with 4 men hobos on the 15th of December in bitter cold weather, and arrived in Nashville 2 days later. We rode the front end of a passenger train from there to Chattanooga. When the conductor found us half frozen on the blinds, he asked us where we were going, and we said Chattanooga. He took us into the coach and let us sit down. The passengers took up a collection and paid our fares, and one older woman, plainly dressed, invited us to her home in Chattanooga. We accepted and stayed 3 days. Then I noticed that she was a little too interested in Ina and sat watching her across the living room in the evenings. One night she asked Ina to sleep with her, and Ina made some excuse, and the next day we got out of town. While roaming around the town the day before, we had met a pair of twins, the Morgan sisters, Pauline with the buck teeth, and that was the only way I could tell her from the other, and May. They lived down beyond Jacksonville, Florida, and urged us to go along the road with them. It was on this trip that we stopped out of a very important hobo camp on the outskirts of Jacksonville. The girls had stopped there before. Camp Busted, as it's called, was about 3 miles from the edge of town, on the banks of a little stream and hidden from the tracks and the highway by a cluster of trees. When we arrived, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, there were already 30 men, 15 women, and 18 children, all white. At the edge of the camp were 4 or 5 dilapidated cars and 1 truck. There was also motorcycles and a couple of bicycles. "We're just about to get supper," said a large, greasy-faced woman in overalls. "Have you girls had victuals or money to throw in the pot? If you ain't, you're welcome, just the same, but there's a lots of things we need for supper. Got plenty of vegetables, but we need butter and some condensed milk and some dessert. And if you got any money, we gotta buy some cheesecloth and cotton for some of the ladies here. And somebody got to go down to the doctor, the dispensary, and get a bottle of cough syrup. And if you kids can panhandle," spoke up a lank, worn, bald-headed man of 50 named Tolliver, "I wish you'd bum an axle for me. That old Chevy of mine. If it wasn't for Mr. Jameson with his truck, my wife and 2 kids would have starved to death in that swamp." May took hold of my hand and said, "Boxcar, let's go to town and see what they want." And Don, a boy of about 15, offered to drive us in. As we left, his sister Susie approached him. "Don't forget about the tickets for the gas," she said, and handed him a length of rubber hose. We left Don on the town siphoning gas from a Peerless into a milk bottle. "I've never taken gas from anybody unless his car cost over $2,000, he told us. "These folks with Fords and Chevys are as poor as I am." "Do you know how to bag, Bertha?" asked May. "Not very well, I'm afraid." "Just watch me then." The first place we stopped was a drugstore. "I want to see the manager," said May. "Yes, ladies, and what can I do for you?" "We girls are sick and haven't any money. Will you trust us for some Kotex?" she asked without embarrassment. The manager blushed furiously and hemmed and hawed. "Why, certainly," he said, avoiding her eyes. "Is there anything else you'd like?" "Well, it would be very kind of you to give us a soda, and we could use a little face powder." As we walked out with the things, I whispered, "You forgot the cough syrup, didn't you?" "No, I didn't. I believe in dividing my patronage." Next, we visited the famous grocery and meat market. "Hello," said May to the manager. "How's business?" "All right. Thank you, miss. What can we do for you?" "We're broke. We're from out at the hobo camp, and we just need a lot of things." His eyes grew hard and his mouth set in a firm line. "Then go down to the charitable organization and tell them about it," he said. "And if you come in here again, I'll have you locked up." "Okay, baby," May answered him jauntily, and we turned and walked out. When we were on the sidewalk, she grinned at me. "Scrummy old bastard, wasn't he?" she asked. "What did you get, Bertha?" "I don't know what you mean," I said. She looked up in surprise, meanwhile fumbling in the folds of her dress. "Do you mean to say you didn't swipe anything from that old bear?" she asked. "Why, I got 2 cakes of soap and a can of tomatoes, and I don't even know what this is." It turned out to be toothpicks. We went into another grocery store. "I want a large basket," she said, "because I want to get a number of things. 2 pounds of butter, a half-dozen cans of condensed milk, 5 pounds of sugar, and have you got some nice fresh cheese? Put in a pound. And I better take 2 dozen eggs, and a bottle of shoe polish, black." The clerk loaded the basket while I looked on in astonishment. May looked all the things over and then turned to the clerk. "Now, my brother's going to come in the car for these," she said, "and he'll pay you when he gets here. Just leave them in the front with the store." She looked at me without cracking a smile. Out we went, left, and went up over a bank to the doctor's office. The doctor was sitting at his desk writing. "Hello, Doc. Have you got any cough medicine?" she asked. "Tell me what's the matter," he said. "Oh, there's a bunch of kids out at the camp, and they're sick and in need of some cough medicine. We ain't got any money, and you look like a good fellow. I thought maybe you'd have some samples." He not only gave her what she asked for, but some pills and 50 cents. We thanked him, and then went out and found Don. "There's a basket of groceries right over there by the door," May told him. "Go get 'em for me." And he did. He just walked over to the door at the right moment, picked up the basket, put it in the car, and drove off. Do you think it's right to steal that basket of groceries?" I asked May. "Do you think it would be all right to let that bunch up at the camp go hungry?" she countered, but I wasn't very happy about it. "I'd feel better if I'd paid for them," I said. "I've got a little money." "Don't be a chump," said May. "Someday I may be a thief, but not now. I don't think my mother or my grandmother would be very happy if I stole the groceries," I continued. Just as I was about to go ahead and pay for them, she stopped me. "Why don't you go over and pay for all the rides you've stolen from the railroad company?" she asked angrily. "Is it any worse to steal groceries than to steal rides from the railroad?" I'd never thought of it that way. It had never occurred to me that riding freights was stealing from the railroad. May made her point. "Drive on, Don. Go to the biggest candy store in town. I'm going to get some candy and ice cream for the children." And then when I came out, I had 2 quarts of cream and a big box of candy I had not paid for. "Which is the worse?" asked May, "begging or stealing?" We had a very happy supper. Old Mrs. Heaton, the cook, had prepared a fine meal in at least a dozen pots and kettles. Each of the car owners and a number of the bundle stiffs, hobos who carry their own cooking utensils and a blanket on their backs, had their pans filled. Gump stew, stolen chicken, was the chief dish, and it was served on pie tins, so was almost everything else served in tin. I saw only 4 or 5 china cups and saucers in the lot. The usual bundle stiff's outfit for the road is a little frying pan, a stew pan for stew or tea or coffee, a tin cup, a knife, fork, and spoon. After supper, we girls helped clean the dishes and scour the pots and pans, and then I helped put the children to bed. One mother had 4 youngsters, 2 had 3 each, 3 had 2, and 2 had 1 each. But all but 2 of the families had cars of their own, and the motorcycle belonged to a woman and her little 12-year-old girl. 3 couples had shared the truck. One of these had 2 children. The youngsters were tucked in the cars or on little pallets on the ground. Then we older ones sat down to enjoy the chilly evening around a huge bonfire. It was a motley crowd. The men were dressed for the road in overalls and jackets, and the women, most of them, because they were for the moment resting, had on calico dresses, cotton stockings, low rough shoes. Only a few had coats. 3 of the men brought out an accordion, a violin, and a fife, and when the music grew lively, some of the older children crept out in their nighties to join in the singing and the fun. Cigarettes and tobacco were passed around, and nearly everybody smoked. 3 of the women were drawing on corncob pipes, and a short, gray-haired woman about 60 pulled out of her pocket a handful of cigar butts and chewed on them, passing the largest ones over to her crony, Sunshine Molly. Molly was a tan, malaria-ridden South Carolinian, traveling with her grown son, Slim. She did not chew her cigar butts, but lit them. "Mom," begged Slim, "can I have the butts when you're finished?" The talk was largely about the road. The car owners had long tails, gas was high, and the cars they had were pieces of junk, needing everything they couldn't afford. "When the charities know you got a car, they won't help you," one of the old men wailed. "They always ask, why don't you sell it? You get 50 or 25 or at least $10 for it." "Well, I got 4 kids and all the junk we own in the world is just in that car. I couldn't get more than $10 for it, and it's our home. You know they wouldn't ask a man to sell his home for $10. "You see this wrench?" spoke up a young Italian. "I can open any pump in any filling station with it." "You know how I get gas?" asked a mother with a babe at her breast. "I just drive up in front of the city hall. I leave my husband and boy in the car, and then I go in with the baby in my arms and find the sheriff or the mayor or the chief of police, and I say to them that we're broke and we need gas and oil or even a new tire. And they'll give it to us. We'll get right out of town. They do. But if they won't, we'll have to take care of us, 'cause we haven't got a cent. I always tell them we've got some relatives about 100 miles further on, if we could only get to them." Don put in, "That's all right in these little jerkwater towns, but in big places they send you to the charity officers, and they want your whole life story." "My old man and I left the girl in Muncie for Florida," a square-faced woman of 40 broke in, "and we used to stop at the city hall in the small towns and get gas and help, but we tried it in one little place in Kentucky and they sent us to the welfare office. They searched our car and found 2 quarts of whiskey. They had us arrested and said we wasn't fit to take care of the child. They took our baby away from us, kept her in an orphan asylum for a while, and then sent her back to Indiana. Anybody that's got any sense wouldn't never go to no charity organization or to the police. They don't like the poor. They never do 'em no good. I'd rather steal or beg on the street. I almost always manage to find a day's work in town." May got up from the fire and stretched. "These plutocrats with cars give me a pain," she said. "Let's go over there a while." She pointed to another fire nearby, where sat 5 or 6 young men, the twins and a girl from Chicago named Sue, a New York Jewess named Helen, and Ina and I joined a new group. We were welcomed with cigarettes, and the talk drifted into personalities, and Sue told her story. "I left New York with my sweetheart, Fred Hardy," Sue said. "He was a wonderful person. Before he took sick, he worked in a bookstore, and we got along fine. But he got terribly weak, so he opened a little restaurant in Forum called the Nail Rack. I helped him the nights when I could, when I got home from my job at the telephone office. He got so sick that I thought Florida would help him, and we started out from Miami, riding freights part of the time, hitchhiking some. When we got to a little town near Birmingham, we had only $1. We stopped at a hotel for 75 cents, and Fred went out to get a package of cigarettes. In the alley near our hotel, a colored man held him up and shot him in the stomach when he resisted. A policeman knocked at my door, and I ran out and found Fred groaning in the street. He was taken to the hospital, but he died 3 days later. Her story led off to other stories of love and sex. Many of the unattached hobos began to edge into our group. They were frankly on the make. Pauline and May set off to the side with 2 of the younger beaux. Georgia Jim was trying to impress the Jewess by asking her a lot of questions, but she flatly refused to have anything to do with him, saying, "Keep your dirty, poisonous hands off of me." Ina had snuggled up to a blonde young Norwegian and didn't seem to hear much of the conversation. And then, out of the shadows on the roadside of the jungles came 2 more men. One was tall, handsome, wearing khaki. The other was a short, strong figure. Suddenly my heart leapt wildly, and I was on my feet in an instant. The short beard, those shoulders. It could only be Malatini. I threw myself into his arms. He was excited to see me and pleased. And for me, the crowd around the fire faded, and my eyes saw only one person, Malatini. We went for a long walk through the woods, down along the edge of the highway. He had been organizing the Italian cooks and waiters for a strike, and was driving to Miami the next morning, and there would catch a boat a few days later for New York. "I'll go with you," I said. He looked at me a little wistfully and hesitantly. "But I don't have enough money to take you," he told me. "Never mind, we'll get it," I insisted. Don drove me to the telegraph office in town early in the morning. I wired both EAO in Seattle and Lowell Schrader in St. Louis. In great need, if possible, wire me $50. By the next evening, I had $100, and Ina and I took a bus to Miami. When the boat sailed for New York, we were on it with Malatini. I had looked forward to a beautiful experience with him. I had known him for a long time, and there seemed to be between us a strong and compelling attraction. I knew that I loved him, and I felt that I was his so strongly that he must be mine. But it was one of the commonest errors human beings make. But to my surprise, he refused to come to my cabin, nor would he let me come to his. We walked the deck. He was miserably silent. "Darling," I said, "why don't you talk to me? Why won't you let me love you? What have you got on your mind? Why are you so unhappy? Life is to live." "Baby, you don't understand," he said. "I have love for the people and not for myself or for a woman. All over the world, people are hungry. Tyrants, kings, dictators, popes, priests, capitalists make the slaves of the people. I want to get rid of them. I have nothing left to love a woman with." But I did understand. When I looked into his eyes and felt his suffering, I felt humble and no longer wanted to intrude my yearnings for his body upon his spirit. I wanted to be a part of his work and to share his suffering. When he left me at the dock in New York, I held his head to my breast, and we told each other goodbye. Malatini was to spend only a few days in New York, busy days, and then we'd be off to Chicago. And that's the end of Chapter 6. Please like and subscribe.